Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Breaking news on migration to the United Kingdom. The latest figures just out, and the official estimates show that net long-term international migration to the United Kingdom was 246,000 in the year ending March 2017. That's the lowest level for 3 years. The number was down 81,000 to 246,000 over the past year, which is the lowest level for 3 years. And the Office for National Statistics are saying that fall in EU net migration to Britain was driven by an increase in emigration for EU citizens. So EU citizens leaving this country. We're going to be talking a little bit more about that shortly. Do let us know your thoughts on that. Now, a teenager who has lived in the UK most of her life with her British mother says her life has been turned upside down by Brexit. Estelle Dragon, who has a French father, has lived here since she was 6. After Brexit, she applied to become a permanent resident in the UK, but her application was rejected. Her story will be familiar to many EU nationals worried about their status, despite assurances by the British government that most will be allowed to stay. Celestina Ololude reports.
This is me and my sister at primary school. Must have been 6. That was my first day at high school.
I felt very grown up.
Yeah. My high school prom. These are my Holbrook High School days. I kind of felt safe in a way because I thought that I would be able to become a citizen, and we always said, you know, whatever the Brexit results are, you know, we'll still be able to get me citizenship. But obviously that didn't work out.
This is home for Estelle. The 19-year-old student was born in France to a French father, but when her parents divorced, she left for the UK with her younger sister and British mother. For the past 13 years, she's lived here as an EU national, but when Brexit was announced, she felt she needed to begin the process to become a British citizen. The first step was to become a permanent resident, but her application was rejected.
This is the refusal letter telling me that my application has been rejected. It actually says on there, the notices also explain whether and when you are required to leave the United Kingdom, which obviously was really scary to read. Here are the reasons for my refusal. You have not provided evidence of comprehensive sickness insurance cover while studying in the UK as required by the immigration. I think I cried, I seem to remember.
This happened to Estelle because, according to EU law, students who want to become permanent residents in the UK have to have comprehensive sickness insurance, a form of private medical cover. But because of the NHS, many never thought they needed it. Had Estelle been under 18, things would have been different.
It's horrible because I feel responsible. Had I gone for British citizenship for her before she turned 18, she would have had it. But at the time, Brexit wasn't on the cards. There was no need for it because she had the same rights as anybody else living here.
I feel like, in a way, my life has been put on hold because I don't know what is going to happen. I don't think anybody does really know what's going to happen.
Whilst this isn't a new law, Brexit has sharpened the focus on what has become a significant rule for some EU nationals. Jocelyn Howarth is an immigration lawyer who's dealt with numerous cases involving CSI.
So what's your reaction to the current situation around permanent residents and CSI?
I keep hearing, I didn't ever expect to consult a lawyer. What's comprehensive sickness insurance? I just didn't know that I was supposed to have private medical insurance to study. And my response always to the last comment is, no one knew.
What's made things more upsetting for Estelle is that her younger sister Clara was able to become a British citizen. That's because she's under 18, and so a different set of requirements apply.
How did you feel when your passport came through?
I felt quite guilty in a way because I got it all quite easily, whereas I know my sister is going through quite a hard time to try and get her citizenship.
Quite obviously I was happy for my sister, but it was quite upsetting at first because obviously, yeah, we are sisters, we've grown up together, we've done everything together, and we now have different nationalities. It feels very strange actually, and very unfair, kind of intensifies how ridiculous this whole thing is.
We approached the Home Office for a response, but they told us they wouldn't comment on an individual case. They told us that people like Estelle don't need British citizenship to stay in the UK. In a statement, they told us, in June, we published detailed proposals which would ensure EU citizens would be treated as if they were UK nationals if they are granted settled status. And it's this new proposal of a settled status which would give EU nationals the right to stay here indefinitely. If it's approved, people could stay without needing private medical insurance.
Well, I think it's not the law yet, it's a suggestion. There isn't a lot of guidance on what this new settled status proposal is, what the requirements are for it. I think it's hard to say to my clients, oh, don't do anything. At the moment there'll be this new settled status because I don't know enough about it. The proposal is too narrow.
It's this starting point, kind of the reassurance I need just to feel kind of welcome in this country at least. But to be honest, it's not really enough in terms of fairness because, you know, I should be able to become a citizen, you know, because I'm half British.
Well, we can speak now to Emma Brooksbank, who is an immigration lawyer and is in Leeds. Nicola Hatton, who is co-chair of the 3 Million. It's a campaign group that works to defend the rights of EU citizens, joins us from Bristol, and also with us in the studio, Andrew Rosendale, Conservative MP for Romford. Welcome, all of you. How do you see this, Andrew? The sisters see it as ridiculous and unfair.
Being a British citizen is not a right. You have to earn that right, whoever you are and whatever direction you come from. So everyone goes through a process if they want to apply to be a British citizen. Now, there are anomalies with the system, of course there are, and if in this particular case Estelle feels aggrieved, of course she can appeal, she can reapply. The fact of the matter is that no one is going to ask her to leave the United Kingdom. She is a French citizen. That means that as an EU citizen she will have the right to stay in the UK. So my advice to her is to appeal or to reapply. I'm certain that there will be a solution to her individual issue.
You say that no one has a right, you have to earn that right, but how do you think they feel as sisters, where one has been told you don't have the right and the other is told you do?
Well, because we're all individuals and there's different status. The other sister was under 18,
yeah.
And so there's a different rule for someone of that age compared to someone who's over 18. These things can all be resolved, and it's not a political issue, it's not about Brexit, it's about actually going through a process and attaining the status that you require.
It's all coming to light, though, because of Brexit, because people are feeling vulnerable and wanting to get their status assured, and that is why they went down the path that they went down. The government says that there will be a new settled status that will give EU nationals the right to stay in the UK indefinitely. But clearly people aren't reassured, which is why they're going down the path of trying to get security. Can you understand that?
Well, I do understand it, but I also understand the importance of Britain controlling the numbers of people coming into our country. And other countries have similar systems. The EU obviously has been a different situation because we've had free movement. Well, that's going to end in 2019. So the government quite sensibly putting in a new mechanism, which means that every single EU citizen that's legally here at the moment can actually stay. No one's going to be asked to leave, provided they're here legally, provided they're law-abiding, and provided that they have gone through the process of applying for settled status. So I don't think anyone needs to worry. After we leave the EU, new people that want to come in, of course, there's going to be a new situation with that. And therefore, I think those who are currently here, as long as they're here legally, of course, have nothing to fear and they will be welcome to stay.
Nicola, are you reassured by what you hear from Andrew?
Not quite. I think that Estelle case shows that the Home Office got these Monty Python types of rules when it comes to EU citizens, and that too many of us have now been receiving letters asking to leave in error, that the rules are too complicated, and quite often we didn't know about the rules because they change. So a lot of us, when we came to this country, if we required CSI, we were not told at the time that we needed this insurance, and then we get caught in that Monty Python system.
Ultimately, though, I mean, those letters that you referred to were described by Theresa May as unfortunate, having been sent out in error. So those that received the letters telling them they had to leave are not actually in a position where they have to leave. And the overall position of the Home Office and the government is that there will be a settled status. That means that EU nationals living here do have the right to stay indefinitely. Do you kind of have to, can you close your ears to the noise and just sort of sit comfortably and trust that everything will be all right in the end?
Well, we need to work on a solution that will work for the 3 million EU citizens that came here in good faith, made the UK their home and wants to stay. At the moment, I think that we're not really there. There is a negotiation, the Brexit negotiation. The settled status is just a proposal, it's not a policy, and we're working quite closely as the 3 million organisation to propose solution that would work for everyone. Because I think it's, we want something fair and practical, and I think that Andrew will agree that it's got to be fair and practical for the people that live here.
Andrew, respond to that. I mean, it's a very good point, isn't it, that the settled status is an aspiration, it's a proposal, there's no guarantee, and that's why people are desperately trying to sort their status now before everything gets nailed down.
Look, the negotiations with the EU are taking place now. What's very bad, frankly, is that the EU have ignored the British offer. Theresa May made an offer a year ago that all EU citizens living in the UK would stay and be welcome, provided it's reciprocal. But unfortunately, the EU haven't come back and agreed to that. So unfortunately, they're playing politics.
If the UK is prepared to offer it, why not just give people here assurance and say we will do it unilaterally?
Because it has to be, Joanna, it has to be reciprocal. We have large numbers of British citizens living in EU countries. We can't just abandon them. If the EU keeps playing politics with people's lives like this, we have to first and foremost put the interests of British citizens first. But we want EU citizens who are here legally to stay here and feel welcome. There are 3.2 million EU citizens here. All of them are welcome to stay. We want them to stay, and we're going to give them settled status. So the matter will be resolved, and people should not fear. What they should be doing is telling Brussels to stop playing politics with people's lives and agree to a reciprocal arrangement.
Emma, you're a lawyer. What is the best advice to give people now? I mean, the message from the government seems to be sit tight, it will be fine. You don't need to scramble right now to sort yourself out.
Yeah, and I think that Andrew's perhaps overstating the point in terms of the security that European nationals can feel in response to this settled status announcement. It is, as Nicola says, simply a proposal, and it is contingent upon a reciprocal arrangement being put in place for British nationals overseas. It isn't at all certain. And we can't have any guarantees at this stage that this will be put into policy. So when we're advising our clients, we're having to say, you may want to apply for permanent residence now because we don't actually know what the future will hold. But at the same time, by applying for permanent residence now, you may be having to go through an onerous, difficult application process now and then again in the future in order to be able to secure settled status. For some clients, it will be right for them to sit tight and to see how it pans out and what happens in the future.
How many people are coming through to you on this?
We have had a huge surge in inquiries, and 70% of those coming from European nationals relate to permanent residents, and a significant number of those have issues with comprehensive sickness insurance.
I just want to actually, Andrew, put to you the Office for National Statistics figures just out on net migration here, down dramatically. 81,000 to 246,000 in the year to March of this year, and the ONS saying that big fall is driven by an increase in emigration for EU citizens. It sounds like they're leaving because they don't feel welcome.
I don't think so. I think that I think it's good news. I think that the British people have wanted to see a reduction in immigration. It's been government policy for a long time. The interesting thing is we've got the highest number of people in employment at the same time. So that may indicate that actually some people are leaving the UK, but it's not necessarily affecting the job market in that sense. So obviously there are only figures issued today, but I think most people in this country will be pleased. At last we're seeing a reduction in the numbers of people coming into this country. We do have to limit the number of immigration, and I think the British people have said that in the referendum, they've said that in general elections, and if this is now happening, this is actually, I think it's going to be welcomed by most people across the country.
Thank you very much. We're going to be talking more about those figures shortly, but for now, Emma Brooksbank, Nicola Hatton and Andrew Rosendale, thank you very much. Fewer people are arriving in the UK from the 8 former Eastern Bloc countries that include Poland, Latvia, Lithuania and Hungary. That's according to the latest figures from the Office for National Statistics. More nationals from these countries are leaving the UK. It means net migration has fallen to its lowest number from those countries since they joined the EU in 2004. So why is it happening, and what does it mean for the sectors that rely on EU nationals? We can speak to Nigel Howard, who works for MPS Crane Operators. It's a company that supplies crane operators to building sites around the UK. He says they have seen a drop in EU national workers, but the UK nationals are keeping up with supply. He's in Liverpool. John Hardman runs Hops Labour Solutions, an agency which supplies farm workers and relies on EU workers. He says there is a shortage of workers and crops will be left rotting in the future if it continues. He's in Lincoln. We're also joined by Istela Kocha-Uta from Lithuania, who's been in the UK for 9 years. She works for Poskits. It's a farming business which supplies vegetables to supermarkets and has seen lots of Lithuanians leaving the UK in recent months. She joins us from Goole in Yorkshire. Thank you all very much for joining us. Nigel, tell us more about the picture that you have seen in terms of the drop in EU national workers.
Well, the company I work for has been involved not just in deploying crane operators all over the world for the last 30 years, but also employing the operators from all over the world. And yes, we have seen a marked decline in the number of people wanting to come and work in the UK as crane operators. There's several reasons. I couldn't really pinpoint one in particular. It's just happened, and over the last 6 months, I haven't had anybody contact me, with a request for training and a change of certification to work over in the UK.
I mentioned that you said that UK nationals have been making up the shortfall. So has it mattered for your business?
Not really, no. I think there's been an increase in, dare I say, UK people taking up an interest in crane operating, because at the end of the day it's quite a well-paid job and it's relatively easy to get into because you don't have to do any lengthy apprenticeships. You can go on a 2-week course and within 2 weeks you're virtually qualified to go and work on a construction site. Rightly or wrongly, but that's the way it is. That's the way the training is structured at the moment.
John, what's your experience been?
Certainly for this season we've had one of the worst shortfalls that we've seen for many, many years. Since the Brexit vote we've had devaluation of the pound, which has probably had the biggest impact on workers. Our country is sometimes viewed as being maybe racist and xenophobic, and the press in the EU countries has not been particularly kind to the UK since the Brexit vote.
So Nigel says that in his area the shortfall in EU workers has been made up by UK nationals, but you're saying that there's a shortage of workers and crops will be left rotting in the future if it continues. Are UK workers not stepping in?
Certainly with the benefit system as it's run at the moment, there isn't really any incentive for UK workers to come off benefits and come and work in agriculture. And quite often where we have large populations of EU workers is not where we have hotspots of UK unemployment. So if we look at, say, Bradford or Hull, it's very difficult to then commute those people down into Herefordshire or Kent. You are from Lithuania, and I mentioned that you said that you've seen lots of Lithuanians leaving the UK
in recent months. Why do you think that is?
Well, after all the conversation with friends we have who suggesting leave or who left, it's the situation, it's an unclear situation in UK after the Brexit votes. For the new arrivals, they are not sure where they stand, if they will come to UK and will try to find a work or, create their life, as well as already somebody mentioned that the pound drop recently, and all the friends or the people I know, for one or another reason, come here to work and earn and find some maybe more savings to send back to and help the relatives in their own countries. And when the pound drops significantly, it's now hard to save and, to see the point to stay here when you can go back in your own country and
Would you definitely stay? Would you think about returning?
I don't think about returning to Lithuania at the moment, but it really depends, because this unclearness after the Brexit really bothers me as well. And I said I try not to think at the moment and just do my own, daily routine, and we'll see what's happening, and then we'll make decisions as well as other people chooses, like friends chooses the more attractive countries, the more welcoming countries like Scandinavian, like Norway, Sweden, Germany, where they can earn and be more welcome, maybe because taking that hard decision to leave their own country, you don't want to feel unwelcome and in the country you choose. So that's what probably drops UK at the moment, with all the Brexit onto the bottom list.
Just briefly, John, I spoke to a Tory MP earlier about the net migration figures and the fact that there has been a dramatic fall, down 81,000 to 246,000 over the course of the past year. He says people will welcome that. It's a good thing. How do you see the stats?
Well, certainly, if that's come from a Tory MP, then the Tories would promise net migration to tens of thousands for many years and never achieved it. And the Brexit voters certainly turned the tide, and that's why they're seeing a drop in net migration. But I'd probably like to ask that Tory MP who is going to pick our fruit and vegetables in the future.
Thank you all very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Well, join me now to discuss this is restaurant manager Ibrahim Dogus. Many thanks indeed for joining us this afternoon. So just tell us a little bit about your industry and the importance of migrants' labour to it, Ibrahim.
I mean, it is widely known that most workforce within the hospitality industry comes from EU countries. So in London, for example, I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of restaurants and takeaways across the country, and who are all relying on European nationals to work within them.
So, Ibrahim, when you find out that these figures are for 246,000, the net immigration figures has fallen to this number in a year, what does that mean for your business and businesses like it?
I mean, I've started the restaurant that we are in today, Westminster Kitchen, about a year ago. Just a month before the vote on referendum in June, back in May, we signed a contract and we start recruiting people for this business. And a month later, in July 2016, we start operating with a new team of 25 people, of which 24 were from European nationals, were from EU countries basically. And a year later, none of those people are around. They've all gone back, or I mean, mostly they've gone back. Some might have changed jobs, but mostly they've gone back. And we have a new team of people running this restaurant with me now. In my capacity as the chair of British Takeaway Campaign, we have surveyed our members. And 1/3, I mean 35% of our members are worried about the immigration. They are worried that they would not be able to find the right staff to employ, both in their kitchens but also in their front of the house. So this is a growing concern for the hospitality industry within the UK. So we are all expecting our government to pay more attention to the needs of businesses, especially small and medium enterprises in the UK. So that we could have access to workforce both within the EU but also outside the EU. As a result of Brexit vote, most of those staff are worried, and due to uncertainty that it has caused, people are making plans to go back and so on. So unemployment figures have gone down in the UK. You're looking at 4.5% of people being unemployed. So with 3 million European nationals, if we end up losing more of those people who have a job, who are working in the UK, who are contributing to our communities, to our life, to our economy and so on, we will be losing more than gaining anything.
Ibrahim, Remainers will say that there are serious concerns that there will be a vital brain drain in particular industries like yours, for example. Brexiteers will say, well, hang on a minute, the UK economy, the UK industries are very robust, very flexible, and of course there's going to be an initial glitch since the outcome of the referendum results, but ultimately in the long term, British industries will survive. The restaurant businesses will survive in this country.
I mean, we will carry on doing our best in terms of finding local talent, providing training, making sure they have the skills to work in these businesses and so on. But it won't be enough. There's got to be a support from the government to get more people into this industry, to make sure that there are more and more people interested in making careers, developing their careers within this industry. But bear in mind, it is not just about restaurants, takeaways, or hospitality industry, hotels and so on. Think about the tech companies, start-up companies. We cannot build a Silicon Valley by closing down our doors to people. I mean, we can only build a Silicon Valley, a successful tech business, or in any other industry, basically, by opening up, by making sure that talented, skilled people are looking for a way to come and work with us here in Britain. I mean, that's how our success would be measured, I think. Us being more attractive to talented people willing to come and work with us is the measure of success, rather than closing our doors and, talking about numbers, rather than skills, talents, and people coming into our country, helping us to develop and prosper, basically.
So how concerned are you that this trend will continue into the long term?
I mean, it looks as if it's going to continue because we have constant relations with our workforce. We're running small businesses, so we are on daily basis, we are talking to our staff, and every day you feel the stress, the worry, the concern they have, and the plans they're making. I mean, some still, amongst our workforce, we still have people who are not sure whether they would be here next year or not.
Ibrahim, many thanks indeed for sharing your thoughts with us this afternoon. Ibrahim Douglas, restaurateur in London, talking to us.
Thank you very much.
Well, back to that story on a drop in immigration figures. It has been driven largely by a dramatic increase in the number of EU citizens leaving the UK, combined with few people coming to the UK looking to work. Well, Charlie Mullins is the owner of Pimlico Plumbers, told Sky News he's concerned about a skills shortage.
Well, I mean, it's very worrying because there's a massive skill shortage, there's a massive shortage of nurses. So it's fairly obvious because we're unstable at the moment and don't know where Brexit is going to be taking us, then of course it's a worrying time. And undoubtedly it's going to affect the economy, which will affect everybody.
Well, joining me from Bordeaux is Madeleine Sumption, Director for Oxford University's Migration Observatory. Many thanks indeed to you for joining us. So is Brexit the key factor here?
Well, we don't know exactly why people are leaving in greater numbers because the data don't tell us that. They just tell us how many people are coming and going. Most people say that they're going home to live among these Eastern Europeans who are headed out of the country. But it's very likely that the referendum plays a role. And that could actually be for a number of reasons. A part of it could be the exchange rate, the fact that after the Brexit vote, the pound lost some value. So that means that money earned in the UK is worth less to people relative to the currency in their country of origin. But it also could be a feeling that migration is no longer welcome. People could be responding to that more kind of the social impact of the vote. So it's very likely that Brexit plays a role, but it's difficult to pin down exactly how.
Yeah, the Institute of Directors has today expressed concerns about the potential for a brain drain in vital industries. I mean, are those comments, those thoughts justified, Madeleine, or is it getting ahead of itself?
Well, so far, the levels of net migration to the UK, I mean, by historical standards, they're still relatively high. And the decreases that we've seen over the last year in net migration of EU citizens they're interesting, they're quite sharp, but it's not a dramatic change in the nature of immigration to the UK. What it does show, I think, though, is it's a taste of what is potentially to come if the government, through the Brexit negotiation, it brings in a much tougher system of work permit requirements for EU citizens, that's when you would expect to see much greater decreases in net migration of EU citizens. And a lot of employers who've become really reliant on that workforce over the last 10 or 15 years will have to think about how they change their business model in order to cope with the change.
Yeah, so how indicative are these figures of long-term concerns relating to Brexit? Is it early to say? We are now just over a year since that referendum result. There will be people who will say, well, of course there'll be a glitch because the referendum result was only a short time ago. We need to give it a little bit more time, maybe another year, maybe 2 years before we have a clear indication of the impact of Brexit.
It's an interesting question. I mean, in some ways, what we're seeing now, this is just a holding period because we know that policies are going to change. And so in the much longer term, the whole immigration system could be very different. I think what's interesting in terms of looking at how people are responding to Brexit is that while you do have larger numbers of people going home, you've also got a lot of people who've been applying for permanent residence to stay in the country, the EU citizens that is, who are keen to nail down a secure status here. So I certainly wouldn't say that the numbers tell us that there's going to be there's a mass exodus of people. A lot of people are keen to stay, and that will presumably continue to be the case in the long run. After all, many of them have been here for quite a long time.
And Madeline, given your studies, given your research, this figure that the Prime Minister has spoken of about getting net migration down to 100,000, is that something that is a workable figure, or is it something that is effectively just pie in the sky?
It's quite difficult at this point to imagine exactly how it could be made to happen, partly just because non-EU net migration alone is well over 100,000. So both EU and non-EU net migration are significantly above that level. It's not impossible that could happen, but it would need a very different immigration system, both for EU citizens and for non-EU citizens. And so it would be, it's not the kind of thing that you can achieve just with some tweaking around the margins.
Madeline, many thanks indeed for joining us.
There's been a sharp fall in net migration to the UK. That's the difference between the number of people entering and leaving the country. It's at the lowest level for 3 years. Let's just have a closer look at the numbers. Net migration now stands at 246,000 in the year to March 2017. That's a fall of 81,000 compared with the previous 12 months. More than half of that change is due to a fall in net migration of EU citizens, which is down by 51,000. But remember, this still means there are twice as many EU nationals coming to Britain as leaving. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Daniel Sanford.
For many Eastern Europeans, the time has come to go. The triggers, Brexit and the falling pound. Among the crowds at London's coach station this afternoon, Daniel Catalin, who's heading back to Romania at Christmas. He said the Leave voters have driven him out.
I think they are like a little bit racist with us, with the European people. Yeah, for that reason.
And that's why you're planning to leave?
Yeah, and also because the sterling is going down, you know, and we want to go there because we can find good jobs, you know, for the same money.
At this chicken hatchery in West Oxfordshire, they've become reliant on workers from countries like Poland that joined the EU in 2004. It's allowed their business to expand year on year. But today's figures show that suddenly almost as many people from those countries are leaving as arriving. The owner is losing staff and struggling to find new ones.
Well, the referendum was when people really thought about it, and over the last 12 months or so it's just got worse and worse. People have thought about it more and more, and it's now becoming a reality. This isn't something that might happen in the future in 2019. For people like ourselves recruiting staff, this is a problem today.
Further up the chain in chicken production, they're even more reliant on EU workers. So for the first time in years, he's planning to shrink the business, not grow it. Rightly or wrongly, huge sections of the agricultural, food production, hospitality and manufacturing industries in the UK have become reliant on a ready supply of workers from the European Union. And now, all of a sudden, that supply is drying up. Today's figures show that the total number of people arriving in Britain to live, study or work, minus those leaving, is still almost 250,000 a year. But that headline figure is dropping, and the biggest single factor is that fewer Europeans are coming and more are leaving.
It's good to see that we've got the third quarter on a run of net migration coming down, but we can't be complacent, we won't be complacent. There's still a lot of work to do, and we'll continue to do that work to deliver ultimately on that long-term ambition to see net migration fall to sustainable levels.
Of course, millions of EU citizens are still working in the UK, in places like this Scandinavian cafe, and many will stay, but it is becoming less attractive.
The UK's economy is now performing less well, perhaps, than some of the Eurozone economies. Another one is that obviously the value of the pound has declined, which means that, firstly, that it's more expensive to live in the UK, things cost more, but also if you're earning money in the UK and you want to spend that money in another country or send it home to your family, it's worth less.
Today's figures are the strongest sign yet of a Brexit effect on immigration. Now the question is, what will the knock-on effect be on the economy?
And Daniel is here with me now. Daniel, so we've looked at the Brexit effect, but there's another aspect to this, isn't there? Students.
Yeah, there's been a lot of concern for many years that some people might be using the route of coming to Britain to study as a sort of back door into the UK, and the government spent a lot of effort on closing down fake colleges that were being used as an illegal way of coming to Britain. And now some work has been done to look at people who come here on a student visa, what happens next. And actually a very positive result for the government. 97.4% of people who come here on a student visa then leave and don't overstay in any kind of illegal manner. So that's quite positive news for them. What the government now wants to look at is whether or not having this large number of international students, more than 100,000 from non-EU countries coming to Britain, has a positive effect on the economy. So having got the thing under control, they're now keen to show that this is actually something that's a net positive effect for the economy and not something that actually doesn't have any great benefits at all.
All right, Daniel, thank you very much.
So thousands of EU nationals have left the UK since last year's referendum. But that's not the only reason that net migration into the country has fallen to its lowest level for 3 years. Figures based on actual exit checks show that, contrary to previous estimates, tens of thousands of overseas students are not overstaying their visas, but leaving when they finish their courses. Paul McNamara reports.
The engine of any good restaurant is its kitchen, and this engine in West London is fuelled heavily with labour from abroad.
How much of your staff has been EU nationals or foreign nationals?
45–50%.
That percentage, though, looks set to drop.
What we don't see is many EU nationals coming in, not a great deal of new applications from people that are coming in from Europe.
Are you actually noticing it then? Is it something that you're physically seeing?
Definitely. For our recruitment manager has noticed that there's not so many people that seem to be coming in and applying that have just arrived in the country.
New figures released by the government today help explain why those applications may have dried up. Net migration, the difference between those entering and leaving the UK, is the lowest it's been for 3 years, 246,000. That's a drop of 81,000 in the year to March 2017. And more than half of that change, 51,000, is due to a decrease in net migration of EU citizens. Alex believes a large part of the reason is Brexit and is worried about the possible impact on business.
So when your staff do start leaving, for whatever reason, how are you going to find replacements?
How are we going to find replacements?
Are you nervous about that?
Yeah. I would say I am.
Alex might not be happy with the trend in migration figures, but the government is.
It highlights the fact that net migration is coming down, which is what I think the British public want to see. And that means that actually within that, particularly for the non-EU net migration figures, we've seen a 20% fall.
Businesses like this haven't just seen a drop in job applicants from people from abroad because of Brexit. Other factors have also contributed. The pound is worth significantly less than it was this time a year ago, so savings don't go as far. And some other European economies are growing much faster, making them more attractive to workers. But even though net migration has come down, it could have been even lower still.
And let me be clear about students. We welcome students coming to study. But the fact is, too many of them are not returning home as soon as their visa runs out.
Well, that was always the belief. International students make up a large section of migration figures. Students like Asuna.
I have to go back and I got good opportunity in Japan.
Today, the first figures of their kind reveal that just like Asuna, almost 98% of students from outside the European Economic Area leave the country in time.
From today's announcement, we can see it is a clear indication that there's a system flaw to counting the students coming into the country and leaving the country. So whether the rhetoric about how immigrants or how international students are harming this society is not true.
Many critics agree, and removing students would slash net migration figures to just over 100,000. That's a huge decrease, but still nowhere near the 100,000 target the government is aiming for.
Well, I'm joined now by Patrick O'Flynn, who's a member of the European Parliament for UKIP, and Jonathan Portis, Professor of Economics and Public Policy at King's College London. Patrick O'Flynn, the overall figures are down 80,000. You must be delighted.
Well, I think it depends the spin that's put on these statistics. You could equally headline another year of mass net immigration pushes UK population to further record high, housing shortage worsens.
But in your eye, it's progress, presumably, to cut it.
Well, it is indeed progress, but to listen to some of the media, you would think you used the term, they're calling it Brexodus. Well, there's about 120,000 more EU nationals living in Britain than at the time of the referendum just over a year ago. So, you know, we are still adding to our already record population and congested public services. There's huge further progress yet to be made.
Jonathan Portis, is it good or bad for Britain?
This is bad news on the whole. We saw the immigration minister saying this was good news that immigration dropped. It hasn't dropped, remember, because of policy. Nothing has changed in law or policy. Free movement is still here. What has happened is that Britain is a less attractive place for EU nationals to come and live and work. It's very difficult to see why that is good news. We were told during the referendum that ending freedom of movement will let us choose the immigrants we want. And that is actually true to some extent. After Brexit, we will be able to have more flexibility about who we let in. But that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is that immigrants are not choosing us. And they may be some of the people who we most need, whether it's nurses, people to work in farms or bars, or indeed people to work in universities.
But that's what you wanted, isn't it?
Well, I would like to see a tight labour market for working class jobs, so the price mechanism can work for working class people in our country too, and they can get back to the days of having some pay rises. I think that would be, you know, an exceptionally valuable thing to happen.
Do we have a tight labour market at the moment? Because we've got very low unemployment.
We have the lowest unemployment since essentially since records began, certainly in the 1970s. So we have a tight labour market already. But more importantly, we have quite a lot of evidence and research that says that immigrants don't take British jobs and have very minor impacts on pay because immigrants increase labour demand as well as labour supply. They grow the whole economy.
They also, I don't believe in the lump of labour fallacy that they displace one for one, but I think you're in danger of falling for a zero displacement fallacy. The truth is somewhere in between. You know, we need skilled migrants in this country. England is one of the most densely populated countries in Europe. We do need a point system. We do low-skilled immigration doesn't work for the public realm, the public.
But what's already come out
today,
is that skilled migrants, the students who come here, who politicians like Theresa May and from UKIP were alleging were overstaying and adding to our net migration, are actually going.
Well, if this is
the whole
borne
debate's
out
been based on a lie,
by the new data, then I welcome that. But that must surely mean, therefore...
So you welcome all these skilled migrants going?
Well, I welcome people adhering to the conditions of entry, and if that's going on, that clearly is welcome. But it must therefore mean that student overstayers must be forming a much smaller component of net migration than was previously thought.
So government policy is based on rubbish.
Well, I think, again, though, the impetus for saying take the students out of the figures is wrong, isn't it? Because everyone who comes, you know, consumes public services, you know, consumes housing, adds to our population. So I think that's a sort of a strange debate for people to be having to take the students out.
Jonathan Portis? What have we learned today from this revelation?
I think, frankly, we knew this already. In fact, it's been well publicised that Home Office has been sitting on this report and this data for some considerable time. Theresa May knew when she made that speech that overstaying was nothing like the problem she made.
Can you know that for a fact? I mean, you're saying she deliberately...
The universities have been saying for years that they know, that they keep records, that they know that their students go back. This data has been this report, we know, and The Independent published a story on it, has been being sat on within the Home Office for some time. So I don't think this has not surprised anybody who knows anything about the subject of student migration. We know that overstaying is not the main issue here. Turning to the broader point, I actually agree partly with Patrick. I mean, if people stay, students are people, and if they stay for a long enough period of time, they are immigrants, and some of them do stay permanently. The vast majority of people who stay permanently do so perfectly legally, but they're legal immigrants. I think, but it just illustrates the wider flaw with having a net migration target at all, whether or not it includes students. It's essentially trying to centrally plan the population and the labour market in what we would like to think is an open, liberal economy. That just doesn't work.
One point I'd like to make is I don't think this data bears out any argument that there's been a kind of fear factor driving EU migrants out of Britain, because we have seen a concentrated fall or exodus among people from the A8 countries who tend to be in lower wage occupations. And we've obviously seen a 15% approximately fall in the value of the pound against the euro. So people who have concentrating on remittances back to their countries of origin will have felt the pinch. So I think it's more of an economic impetus. And of course, the euro is finally having one of its short-lived moments of growth on the back of QE, which I don't think will be sustained.
You'd agree with that?
I think, Patrick, those are perfectly reasonable points. It's not just, there is probably a psychological element that the UK is less welcoming and less attractive, but the points that Patrick makes are also valid. There are economic reasons behind this as well. That's quite true.
Jonathan Portes, Patrick O'Flynn, thank you both.
Thank you.
Since long before the referendum, Brexit and immigration have been inextricably linked. It was the big issue in last year's vote. Now Brexit seems to be having a serious effect. Net migration is significantly down, especially among people from other EU countries. Overall, it's down from 1/3 to 1/4 to the lowest level in 3 years. The fall in the pound has made the UK a less attractive place to work. But it seems when we voted in the referendum last year, we could have been voting on the wrong figures.
If you voted Brexit to cut immigration, well, it's already having the desired effect. Net migration's down to 246,000 in the latest figures, its lowest level in 3 years. For many EU immigrants, the search for a better life is ending where it began. Samina Pantazi's moved back to Greece. The weak pound meant her wages were worth less at home, but the real push wasn't the money, but the mood after the referendum.
I'm a grown-up, I can filter in and out what comes towards me, but the worst part was the children when they're coming home and say, oh, I don't want to go to school again, because other children say, oh, you're Greek, why are you here, what are you doing here?
Decisions like hers mean net migration has fallen by 81,000, about 1/3. That's partly because fewer EU citizens arrived here, down 51,000, and because more of them left the UK, up 33,000, particularly Eastern Europeans. That's a problem for those relying on new arrivals. This poultry farm doesn't just need chicks, but EU workers. The boss says uncertainty means it's harder to find them.
We employ 2,000 people across our business, and of those 2,000 people, 30% of those people are from European nations. Now, at the moment, we're already seeing people going home, and within our sector, if we can't have the people who are our most important asset, then we can't grow our business for the future.
But the government's trying to cut net migration to the tens of thousands and says EU citizens have already been promised they can stay after Brexit.
Well, we've still got EU citizens coming here, and obviously we are still part of the European Union, so we still have free movement, and businesses who want to recruit from across Europe can do that. That's an important factor. Well, nothing changes until we leave the European Union.
But they're
Obviously,
leaving in greater
away.
numbers already, and we haven't even left the European Union. You promised them certainty. It doesn't look like they feel that certainty.
Well, we have given them certainty. We've made a very clear offer about having settled status for those residents are here. We're seeing a huge increase in the number of them who are looking already to get that citizenship status.
And those who made immigration the focus of the referendum are smiling again today.
If the result of this is that more British people are employed and are employed at a higher wage level, that's something that I should be pleased about, and I would hope that was something that businesses ought to be pleased about as well.
Aside from the debate about the figures going down, there's also a debate about whether they're even right, with 2 reports out today from the Home Office and the Office for National Statistics suggesting net migration could actually be much lower because the number of international students has been overestimated. The data could be out by as much as 100,000 because students are leaving more often than thought.
The fact that the Home Office has been using these unreliable statistics as a basis for policy on student visas and indeed on migration more widely has done considerable damage to the British economy, actually, because it's meant that policy on migration has been founded on a number of false premises.
But there is agreement that the downward trend in today's figures means Brexit's finally in motion. Businesses just hope their workers don't move with it.
Paul, there are so many different components here, aren't there? But this issue of the miscounting of foreign students, how significant could that turn out to be, do you think?
Well, when you consider that we made one of the most important decisions of our lifetimes based loosely or partly around these figures, then you kind of hope that they're right. And actually talking to the Office for National Statistics this evening, they don't necessarily think that these student numbers affect the overall net migration figure. It's incredibly complex. Essentially, though, what's been happening here is they've been using something called the International Passenger Survey up until now to measure people who are coming and going. It's quite a crude measure. They survey people at random at airports. The government has long thought that maybe that wasn't the most accurate way. There's been a big debate about it. And now they're looking at something called exit checks, so passport and visa data. And that's shown that actually 97% of students, international students, don't overstay their visa. So they're leaving when they are supposed to. And that's what's created this debate about are the overall figures right or not? Again, no real definitive answer on that, I'm afraid, this evening, Julie. But aside from the numbers, there has been a huge government focus on bogus colleges, on students who outstay their visa. So I think, a lot of effort by the government there, not necessarily that much gain.
And as you mentioned also in your report, though, we haven't left the EU yet. We've got a big week of negotiations next week coming up, but it's very clear that the process in practical measures is underway.
Yeah, we're feeling the effects now of Brexit, and actually this whole debate today ran like a bit of a rerun of the referendum campaign, only this time it is for real. Businesses really complaining today about what they call a brain drain. Their issue, they say, is unemployment is also at a record low. So where do they get their workers from if they can't even draw them from the UK? Because most people are now in employment. Brexiteers, though, saying, look, you had your chance to make that argument during the referendum. People voted for lower immigration, and that's what they're now getting.
OK, Paul, thank you very much indeed.
On the surface, today's immigration figures look encouraging for the government. Net migration has fallen to the lowest level for 3 years after a surge in the number of EU nationals leaving the UK since last June's Brexit vote. Net migration, the difference between those entering and leaving the UK, fell 81,000 to 246,000 in the year to March 2017. So far, so good for Theresa May, although it's still a long way from hitting her target to reduce net migration to under 100,000 a year. But the figures also reveal that the problem of non-EU migrants overstaying their visas is simply not as big an issue as previously thought. Far, far fewer international students end up overstaying their visas than the Home Office has always claimed. Here's our policy editor, Chris Cook.
As Home Secretary, Theresa May picked a fight with universities. In her determination to wrest net migration down to under 100,000 a year, students from outside the EU were a prime target.
We welcome students coming to study, but the fact is, too many of them are not returning home as soon as their visa runs out. If they have a graduate job, that is fine. If not, they must return home. So I don't care what university lobbyists say, the rules must be enforced. Students, yes. Overstayers, no.
Overstayers were a critical issue to her. So how many of them were there? In migration, the most important data source is the International Passenger Survey. That's how we monitor the net migration target. The ONS stations people at ports and airports with clipboards, and they ask travellers about their duration of stay in Britain and why they came. It's the source of our estimates on migration into the country and emigration out of it. When Ms May gave her speech, the latest IPS figures showed 131,000 non-EU students arriving, but only 38,000 leaving. So a gap of 93,000 people, lots of whom might be overstayers. There was always reason to doubt these International Passenger Survey numbers. They didn't seem to match other sources of data that we had. For example, the immigration records that universities have to hold about their former students. These former students also didn't seem to be showing up in the National Insurance database. And they didn't show up in surveys like the Labour Force survey. So where were they? The thing is, we've now got quite a good answer. New border checks data suggests the International Passenger Survey is simply not very good.
The reliability of the International Passenger Survey depends crucially on whether people answer accurately to questions on why are you coming here and do you intend to stay for longer than a year. And for many people, especially students, those answers may not be correct or indeed known to the person at the time that they're asked the question.
The new border data shows up how bad the IPS has been. We know that in 2016-17, 181,000 students' visas expired, and of these, 176,000 were known to have left. The number of overstayers, at most 4,600, 2.6%. A review of student migration has now been commissioned from the Independent Migration Advisory Committee.
Clearly the IPS has been considered as the best possible tool we've got for determining this. I've actually argued for a long time, indeed before the Migration Advisory Committee was established, that we needed something that was independent of government, that was verifiable in terms of the evidential base.
There was more to Ms May's student squeeze than overstaying. She wanted fewer students staying on legitimately too. But overstayers got outsized importance. So this data matters politically.
Today's announcements tell us that government really has listened to the university sector. We very strongly welcome the way in which they are now trying to provide an evidence-based account of the role of international students. And we think that what that will allow us to do is to create a policy in cooperation with government, especially important after Brexit.
Some people have suggested today that the right response to the student migration data problem is simply to remove students from the migration target. But that doesn't really make sense. You see, this student data problem indicates that one of two things is true about the remaining International Passenger Survey. Either it's making catastrophic errors about the total amount of migration into Britain, or there are other huge offsetting errors in other parts of the survey. The passenger survey makes for a pretty lousy migration measure. It should be replaced. The key question today, though, is why the Home Office and Theresa May put so much weight on it for so long.
Chris Cook there. So, if entire chunks of government policy have been crafted around migration figures, which are simply inaccurate as they appear to be, what are the wider ramifications for immigration targets and Brexit? And why has the Home Office, as overseen by Theresa May for 6 years, used data that may have painted a misleading picture? Well, joining me now is the Labour MP and spokesperson for Open Britain that's campaigning against a so-called hard Brexit, Neil Coyle, and the Tory MP and prominent Leaver, Peter Bone. Good evening, both of you. Peter, if I could come to you first, I know you're in a good mood about these overall net migration figures. I'll try not to, but I'll use facts, if I may. We'll come to that bigger picture in a moment. But as our film showed, the problem of non-EU migrants overstaying in the UK seems to have been widely overstated. And what I want to understand from you is, how are we in a position where the Home Office has been using bogus data?
Well, I don't know you can actually say that. I mean, I think they're having an inquiry to see what the situation is.
Well, the very fact they've called an inquiry would point to the fact that there is a problem.
Well, I think it needs, you know, it's good to look at it. But today's figures
There must be a problem then.
We shall see. But no, don't upset me now. The real point today about the figures is the fact that we've seen this huge drop in net migration by 80-odd thousand, lowest for 3 years. There's still an awful number of people coming in.
Sorry, could you just address... I'm going to come to that point. I made that very clear. Could you just address my question, which is, we are aware of the fact there's going to be an inquiry. You've said that. But is it not concerning to you and to the rest of the UK that there has been misleading data that has been coming through the Home Office? A big part of Theresa May's standing up and talking to people about these migration figures has been that there is an issue, especially with students, they were used regularly, overstaying their visas. We now know it's tiny. The figure is tiny.
Well, I don't know where you're saying everyone was talking about students. I've never been talking about students. My constituents weren't talking about students.
Your leader was. We just showed a clip of her.
Well, the issue out there in the country, and however much the BBC wants to remove away from, these are really good news story today.
We are coming to those, but you don't seem to be able to answer my question.
Well, I can answer your question. There is going to be...
Are you not concerned at all about that? This
but I've never been
misleading.
concerned about students coming to this country and leaving again. So I can't be concerned about something I was never concerned about.
But your leader has been. OK, let me put you a different question. Let's see if you can answer this one. She was the Home Secretary for 6 years. A lot of people say she had a very good reputation in that job.
There, yes.
Well, that's not my view, but some people would say that.
You didn't think she was a good Home Secretary?
Some people would say that. I'm not here to have views, you're here to answer questions, and I'm trying very hard to get some answers. So let me put it to you this. Does these figures and the fact that they are in this position of review not show the Theresa May that we have looked at as a strong and stable Home Secretary in a damaging light?
Not at all. I mean, I don't know why you've got this great idea that there was a big issue about student numbers. It just wasn't there in the country. And I've always been very relaxed about it. It's right that they're included in the figures because that's how the international data is prepared.
You're very relaxed about a figure that has been shown to now be misleading, as we understand it.
Which figure's been misleading?
The figure about the number of students overstaying.
Which particular figure?
OK, let me just bring in Neil.
No, tell me which particular figure.
I'll tell you, Pete. I'll tell you, Pete. Because your party, your government and some of the press that support you have been saying for many years that about 100,000 people who were unwelcome and were overstaying and shouldn't be here, and there was a problem. And that has been exposed as an utter falsehood, as has much of the campaign that you and others were part of to leave the European Union. No. You should be ashamed, and you should be very worried that Theresa May was so closely associated to something that has been proved to be utter rubbish.
OK, that's the point. What do you say to that, Peter?
Well, first of all, I never campaigned in a disgraceful way about student numbers because I've been very relaxed about the student situation. What the problem has been is free movement from the European Union. That's been the issue. And we've seen today encouraging signs that there's a fall in the number of people coming.
OK, Peter Bone, you don't want to address that fact, but you do want to address that, so let me bring Neil Coyle onto it. Peter Bone's in a celebratory mood. Many people today, the majority of the country, voted to leave the European Union, see these figures and say this is the right direction of travel. You surely see today as a bit of a democratic victory for those people.
I'm unsure what the celebration is for, because what Brexodus is showing us, with more Brexodus, more people from the rest of the other EU countries leaving Britain, is damaging because they are leaving paid jobs and making a contribution to our country.
So do you not want these people to leave?
I want our economy to be the best in the world. I want more people to come and live it and contribute to our economy, and I want them to be confident that they can come here. Where British people can be trained and can fill roles, absolutely support that for the future.
So you don't want these people to leave?
But the simple truth is, in the construction sector, in the leisure sector, in the food and farming sector, there are massive vacancies.
Hang on a moment. Did you or did you not tweet today? Did you or did you not tweet today, Neil Coyle, that anti-Brexit campaigners are the real patriots yourself?
Absolutely.
Well, it's hardly patriotic if you want a load of people who aren't from this country to stay here and take jobs away from people who are British and born here, is it?
You're assuming they're taking jobs away from people, and I don't think they are. And
there are a finite amount of jobs, aren't there?
Yeah, and if you look at the Food and Drink Federation report, that shows a third of their members are worried about having to close as a result of not having British workers to fill those jobs.
Why don't they pay people better and maybe they'll get British workers?
The reason I made that tweet about...
It's market forces.
The reason I made that tweet about being a patriot is because I am proud that people want to come to our country to live, to study, to work, to contribute. And I'm proud of the contribution they've made to my constituency and to our country.
Well, Peter
and I think we should be very worried about the people who are leaving and the message they're sending and the jobs they're taking out of our country, because that's the other side of this. To think that these are people who are leaving jobs that will be filled by British people is a mistake. Some of them are taking jobs that simply will not be replaced in this country.
You simply can't prove that at the moment. That is your take on it. Peter Bone,
in my constituency I can.
You're unpatriotic as a Brexiteer. People are leaving. We're making Brexodus happen, and it's terrible for those people. You're an unpatriotic man.
Well, Neil's entitled to his opinion. I've been called a lot of things in my time by the extreme left, and just another one today. I mean...
If he's the extreme left, sorry, what are you?
I'm the centre ground.
Right.
And the British people voted in a referendum, a great democratic debate, and it was wonderful. And the result at the end was to say we come out of the EU and we want to see immigration reduced, and that's what's beginning to happen. We're still a long way off from it.
Well, you got to those figures in the end, even if you avoided answering my first questions. Peter Bone, Neil Coyle, thank you very much.